All right. Good morning to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning also to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. And thanks so much for joining us wherever you are watching from. And if you have been taking a look at our most recent posts in terms of our promos, you'll know that today will be the first of our mini episodes for the series known as Emerald Variance, the Loki series chat. Um, just as we did with many of our prior shows, we're going to be getting into some of the main points, plot points of what have happened in each of the episodes. Seeing that Loki premiered the Wednesday that has just passed, so we will be covering each of the episodes each week. This week we'll be covering the first. We'll be getting into the plot points, as I said, and then also with the help of some guest hosts each week, getting into some of the analysis of what's happening, in the minds of some of these characters, as well as the Easter eggs, callbacks, things of that nature, and even some theories. So welcome, to have you, share your thoughts, as you are watching this series, whether it's happening live or perhaps, you're seeing it as an archive episode. Just a couple of reminders, of course, make sure that you like and subscribe, of course, to our YouTube channel. And also, if you want to be a part of the conversation online, be sure that you use the hashtags that we have in place. So Emerald Variant MNSU, or you can use Glorious Green MNSU. Either of those will suffice to follow along with the conversations that we have here on these episodes of this show. So without further ado, I'm going to try to, because as you will know, with this first episode, it was so jam-packed with so much happening. I will do my best to, run down a lot of the main points of what happened in this episode, in this segment that we have known as Run the File. Little inside joke if you have watched the first episode. So this episode, titled Glorious Purpose, picks up right from the Tom heist in Avengers Endgame, in which the 2012 Loki manages to get away during Iron Man, Cap, and Ant-Man's botch attempt to secure the Tesseract. Loki at that moment is transported to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, where he encounters some of the residents. And before he's able to, try to make an attempt to subjugate them, we're introduced to the TVA, or the Minutemen, as we later learn that are part of that organization led by Hunter B-15. We discovered that Loki, had apparently committed a crime against the sacred timeline, which we'll learn later, by committing a sequence variation. And in a hilarious sequence regarding or utilizing a time weapon, Loki is apprehended, and we're also introduced to a device, a grenade of sorts, recharge weapon that when activated, allows the Minutemen to, before their departure, reset a given moment in the timeline, which at that point, once at the TVA, Loki is processed as a variant, and we're introduced to yet another weapon during that time as he tries to escape that allows B-15 to, reset that position in which Loki is in. So every time he tries to escape, he's brought back into that same point. And during that initial processing, we're introduced to Casey, who I guess you can say in general terms, as you could think of him as the administrator who's left in possession of the Tesseract. And afterwards, we get yet another, fun sequence that includes, Loki being dressed in his variant prisoner garb, Loki questioning whether he's a robot, and also the introduction of a temporal aura, which I'm sure is going to, come into play later down the line. And afterwards, after being sentenced, we're introduced to Miss Minutes, who, provides much of the exposition on certain things, such as like who the TVA is, which is, an organization created by the Timekeepers that protect time, the sacred timeline, which I mentioned before, which identifies, the predetermined path that the Timekeepers have mapped out by organizing the multiverse in a single timeline. Nexus events, which are moments that cause a given timeline to veer off its predetermined path. Variants, who are those beings that have veered off their intended path, and have thus created these nexus events, as well as the multiversal war, which we will get more into. But these multiversal wars, which happen when a nexus event is left unchecked and causes timelines to spiral into chaos. So we skip forward a bit, and we're introduced to our other character that will likely play a major role in the series, with Owen Wilson's character of Agent Mobius, who back in 16th century France is at a crime scene involving some fellow TVA Minutemen who have been taken out by a fugitive variant, which is not yet revealed to us as an audience at the beginning, but we come to find out later what the identity is, and I'll get to that. During that investigation, he's informed of Loki's apprehension and heads back to the TVA, and it's there during the trial that we're introduced to Ravonna Renslayer, who, acting as judge, nearly sentences Loki to be reset or to be, destroyed before Mobius's intervention. And just at that moment, we are provided, some more insight of, I guess, callbacks or just a recap of everything that has happened to our 2012 Loki. But it's during this time that Loki manages to escape yet again. And in that time really comes to know the power that the TVA possesses in a pretty cool sequence that deals with the Infinity Stones and how they, don't have their potency, or they're not they're basically paperweights in this reality that the TVA resides in. And it seems like as Loki comes to that realization, he makes his way back to Agent Mobius and learns further about what his eventual future will be. And is at that time that he's revisited by Mobius, and Mobius, breaks it down for him like, yeah, listen, like, we need your help. And the reason why we need your help is because this fugitive variant that we're after is you. So it's at this point that we basically just have the setup, of the series, and it'll be interesting to see, in what directions they go to show, this variant that we're after, as well as some possibilities of other variants, that are out there. So without further ado, I want to get into introducing our guest hosts. First and foremost, I'll introduce a member of our team that provides many of our reviews, and he's also a host of our Expanse chat that we have, our Juiced Expanse chat. So let me bring him on, Matt Naslanic. See if you can bring him on. Hello, sir. How are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hi.
Good morning. Good morning. And of course, in addition to Mr. Naslanic, I also have our Connoisseur, who also provides our reviews for not just many of our shows. You've also seen him on many of the chats that we have, whether it's been Expanse, whether it's been Falcon and Winter Soldier. Happy to welcome back Movers and Shakers Connoisseur, Chris Pabon. Let me bring him on. What's going on, man?
My friends, I am burdened with glorious purpose this morning. Estoy agobiado por un propósito glorioso esta mañana. Ich bin mit herrlichen Absichten belastet.
Very nice, very nice. So impressive. So with that being said, guys, in talking about this first episode, what were your just initial impressions about what happened, and I guess it would probably be a good segue in talking about like some of the fun things that they had as perhaps callbacks and Easter eggs. But first, just initial impressions. Either of you like to go? Yeah.
So I think that when we had WandaVision, it was a whole new vision, pun intended.
Huh.
Then we have the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was the standard MCU look. So we were left going into Loki with what would we get? Would we get something groundbreaking, or we would get something mainstream? And I am happy to say that they chose something that really is groundbreaking in its look and the feel. If I had to define it, I would say it's retrofuturistic with definite inspiration from the Jetsons. This is how in the 1960s they viewed the future would be. And I also imagine this is probably what the inside of the FBI building looks like, except maybe a little bit less modern. So it was just groundbreaking in the use of the color palette. Somehow the orange just works. It's got this Mad Men vibe to it. And it is carried very firmly on the shoulders of Tom Hiddleston, who does a fantastic job. And I want to get into more on this later, but I thought that one of his really iconic moments of this first episode was when he realizes, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of Infinity Stones here in this box, and is everything that I thought was the superior power is
right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just that look on his face, that moment of acting. I was like, yes, this episode is the harbinger of very good things to come. And I also thought the casting of Owen Wilson was very inspired as Agent Mobius. I mean, he brings us this sort of laid back, yet I also still know everything that's going on here vibe to himself. And I even like the appearance of Casey, who we should talk about more as the office manager, office do everything. And even the look of him walking around with that card, it was just so old office style. I mean, I really loved it. I mean, it's just such a fantastic look. The acting, the writing is solid. You can tell they put a lot of money into this. I mean, visually, it was stunning what the TVA looks like when they're walking through the hallways and they make the jokes about, like, that's another department, but and I'll help you burn that one down. There was so much that I liked, and I want to make a reference to the use of the TVA. The TVA in Marvel Comics is not exactly well known, but they were created by Walt Simonson, and they appeared in Thor number 371. Here we have it right here. Not to be confused with the Tennessee Valley Authority. They also appear in the Fantastic Four when Walt Simonson also did a run there. They are portrayed as a heavily bureaucratic organization, and I think that really came across in this episode. So I just have a WandaVision vibe that I cannot wait for the next episode.
For sure.
I'm going to sum it up in one word: brilliant.
Nice. Matt?
Okay, going into this, I've read quite a few comics in my day, but I never read anything involving the TVA. So I went into this one kind of blind, which I like to do sometimes, let them surprise me.
Yeah.
Starting off on this one, it was like, this was the series of all the Marvel series announced that I was most looking forward to, just because Hiddleston is just so charming. And he the role is just so perfect for him. WandaVision was great. I loved it. Falcon and Winter Soldier was just kind of more Avengers stuff. Also great. Loved it. But this one was the one that had me excited. And that first episode really kind of cemented that for me, that this is the one I'm going to enjoy the most. As Chris mentioned, the retrofuturism is awesome. It feels like a 1940s World Fair inside these things, if you've ever seen any videos of those things. And
definitely.
I love that look. Also, going into this, I had to remind myself, it's like the Loki we've come to know and love, and that's not this Loki. I think a lot of people might not realize that right off the bat, or remember that this is the Loki from 2012 who just got his butt whooped by the Avengers, and it's kind of fun going back and realizing all the growth the character has had over the last few years in movies is all gone.
And I want to talk about that too. I'm gonna get into that a little later because they do something very interesting in this show in terms of a plot device that they do. To kind of, in a way, he's still different, mind you, but in a way, they still try to get him there
It sped it
to a
up.
degree. So that part, I mean, I want to get into more, which I found interesting. So
Okay, I won't mention that here then, because I was about to talk about that. I think the same thing.
yeah, no worries. No worries. So getting back into that, guys. I guess I'll use that as a segue to get into callbacks and Easter eggs. One thing that I want to say in terms of callbacks that was interesting is, you know, they have that idea of, you know, glorious purpose as the title, and you know, one of the things that this episode seemed to touch on is some of the tropes or some of the antics that Loki gets into, and Agent Mobius kind of calls him out on a lot of those things, and we see it throughout the episode. Is just that idea of him, you know, looking to woo, you know, a lot of people in terms of wooing them in order to eventually betray them. You have elements of that where, as a callback, where I was thinking of Avengers Infinity War, like right at the top of Avengers Infinity War, where he is faced with the prospect of dying, and he tries to ally himself with Thanos again after already failing initially years ago. And you have that same thing happening there in the court, in the court scene, where he's trying to ally himself with the TVA, when he's saying that, you know, the Avengers are the actual culprits, you know, not me. You know, you have that element there, and that part I found interesting. Is like, oh, you know, whenever he's like his back is against the wall, you know, he always does this tactic of trying to, you know, woo whoever it is that, you know, he finds threatening and tries to ally himself.
He's like the slimiest ultimate used car salesman. You
know
what I mean?
Yeah, and thinking of that, like, you have that moment, and then you even have moments of certain installments just in the MCU in and of itself as like character turning points where I know it's been referenced before, but I'll bring it up again, is the initial scene of him falling into, I was talking about, you know, during the synopsis of him landing in the desert, like, you know, recalls back the first Iron Man, like what that turning point was. And even with his introduction to the TVA and entering into the TVA and being processed, and that whole element, that whole sequence gave me deja vu of Thor Ragnarok, where, you know, you have that moment where he is placed in the prisoner garb. Reminds me of when Thor was imprisoned, and like he was going through the whole sequence of, he had his hair cut, like he was like basically stripped of the identity that he is accustomed to having for himself and provided with the new one. And then also in that same way, like, you have that exposition piece, because if we recall from Thor Ragnarok, they actually had a voice when Thor was in the chair, where they were giving the whole breakdown of like what Sakaar was all about, and like everything, the whole breakdown of that exposition. And we got the same thing here when they were, you know, getting into what the TVA was about, how they were founded, and all that stuff.
And did you notice who the voice was?
Yes, Tara Strong. Yes.
I love Tara Strong. She's brilliant.
Yes. So yes, a cool Easter egg there of having Tara Strong, who many people know as Harley Quinn. She is the best Harley Quinn. Not just across the board, not just animated or live action. I
feel like she's in just about anything animated, and she's great at it. So, you know.
But were there any callbacks, like, for you guys that you noticed that were kind of cool before I get into like some of the Easter eggs? Go ahead, Matt. What about?
No, you go ahead, Chris.
Well, excuse me a second. Gosh, these things are just all over the place. I mean, they're like cicadas. I mean,
and some people use them for paperweights.
Paperweights, right? I mean, it's all over the place. I thought that within the whole episode, a lot of things you point out, it rings true. The starting in the desert, so we're going to sort of start anew. I thought that it also kind of mimics a lot of what you see in Joseph Campbell, that okay, you sort of need someone to guide you in this new path that you're embarking on.
The hero's journey.
Yeah, a hero's journey. In this case, being that Loki sort of has the Luke role, and Agent Morbius sort of has the Ben Kenobi role. That he's got to start, and on his way, he will start picking up, allies. Like for example, Casey, I think is quite possibly one of the allies. So I do think that it also has a Joseph Campbell Star Wars nod in this first episode, and I really dig that.
Cool.
So something I thought was cool that they mentioned, as you mentioned in Tara Strong's voiceover there, about the Nexus events.
Yes.
And I believe WandaVision introduced the whole Nexus idea, didn't it? As she is a Nexus being.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if that's going to come back and we'll see that again.
Well, perfect segue. So going into Easter eggs, and talking about the Nexus event, if I recall correctly, and I'll have to forgive me out there that I'm a little rusty when it comes to Nexus, but if I recall correctly, a Nexus being deals with someone who remains the same among the various among the multiverse. So like or to say they exist, if I remember correctly, Chris, that they exist in all the various iterations in the multiverse. So like if there's one universe where a character doesn't exist, that you have that character that remains a constant throughout the multiverse.
To quote Doctor Who, a fixed point in time.
There you go. So, but yes, like the thing that was cool in terms of Easter eggs is that we have reference to multiple films in the MCU. A case in point of what you were talking about, Matt, where we have a reference to the multiverse of madness with the upcoming Doctor Strange film of, okay, they give a tease of what that's all going to be about, where you have a Nexus event like that and things, start to spiral out of control. And then they also have a reference of, as it starts to spiral out of control, what could possibly be our big crossover for, the next couple of phases. How like the first 3 phases we had, what was it? The Infinity Saga. This may just be a setup for Secret Wars potentially, with everything going into chaos of all these various iterations of different characters from multiple timelines going to battle with one another. So like I found that interesting. And then even with I'm brain farting on the character name, Ravonna Renslayer. She has ties to a character who we are yet to see, but they are upcoming in another franchise, in the Ant-Man franchise, as a matter of fact, with Kang the Conqueror. So Jonathan Majors, who many of us know as the main character from the HBO series Lovecraft Country, awesome series. I highly recommend you guys check it out. He will be playing Kang the Conqueror, who is a time traveling villain, Avengers villain, and I mean he's appeared across like many to tangle with many characters, but what I remember him from is his conflicts with the Avengers, and he has a romantic ties to that character. So will they utilize that in some way, or is it going to be different this go around? I know sometimes the MCU likes to change things around, but at the same time, sometimes they bypass a lot of things to make it a little less complicated and try to make many ties together to simplify things. So will they still keep that element here? What are your thoughts on that for either of you?
So I think we're going to see the TVA through the next iteration of the Marvel movies. So the whole Nexus being things from the Marvel fandom wiki here. Nexus being is a rare individual with the ability to affect probability and thus the future, thereby altering the flow of the universal time stream. So Wanda's going to be one of those, I think. And that is what I think is going to have a huge effect over the next movies. You're going to have Doctor Strange, you're going to have Kang the Conqueror, you're going to have all these things, but I think it's all going to tie in with that. And I think Wanda's going to be the big kind of the focal point of all the next few movies. And I think we're going to see the TVA reacting to that.
For sure.
I have a whole theory where they're going to have to try and take her out or something like that because she can affect the universal time stream. And, that's a theory I'm fleshing out in my head that might go nowhere. But, So we'll see.
So the larger question I have regarding Khan is, we know that the movies will have some feedback from the TV series because it's all going to be more interconnected now. Like what you see in the TV series is going to have repercussions in the movies, and we'll get our first example of that with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But Kang is interesting because there has been a lot of chat about he's going to be the next big bad, and he's going to appear in Quantumania. So is Kang one of the 3 Time Lords? Is that what we're going to see throughout Loki? I mean, could it be that he decides that if he is one of the Time Lords, that he can do a better job without the other 2? And so this is something that I want to go into later on, which is like, who is the variant that's killing all the Minutemen? Because I'm not convinced it's Loki.
Well, first off, the little girl pointed to the window. Is that Mephisto?
No, see, what I took that as, and it's actually has already been confirmed that it is indeed Loki. So if you notice that the character has horns, they have horns, but it's more of an indication of how that character is perceived, or that variant
as
is
the
perceived.
devil.
So it is in fact Loki and not Mephisto. Darn, I know so many people out there want Mephisto to happen, but it looks like it is not the case this go around.
You know what? I'm going to still hold out hope. I'm going to hold out hope.
So with that being said, I guess I'll use that as a moment to transition into some variant motives, if you will, and going into the thought process with some of the characters. We touched on a little bit of this just now. Just a bit. We teased it a bit earlier in talking about what's happening with each of our characters, and I guess I'll start first with Loki. And I know we were talking about it just before, Matt, and talking about the device that they use with the, I guess you could just call it the film file. I guess you can say, of allowing a variant to see. Or I'm assuming a lot of times this is a rare occasion where a variant is allowed to see, what their path is. I'm assuming that is just the agents that have an opportunity to see this. So this is probably a rare occurrence.
Well, I think that's only because they said he can't go back.
Right. But in that regard, like using it as a device, not only in a meta way, for someone who perhaps they haven't seen all the all the MCU films, and they need to be caught up in a quick fashion. That was a creative way to do that. But also in talking about this variant and knowing the thought process, or where his mindset is in 2012 versus where we know it eventually leads over the course of other adventures, whether it's in the Dark World with the elves, or in Ragnarok with Sakaar and with Hela, and then eventually how it concludes at the top of Infinity War, and how he's able to kind of go through those. I guess we were talking about the 12 stages of the hero's journey, Chris, but also in thinking about like the 12 stages of grief, I guess you could say, of him like just going through it was interesting as acting wise to see him go through psychologically, and you can see him do it as he's watching it go through all of those. It was
almost like fast forwarding 8 years of character growth.
Exactly. So, I mean, you still have the caveat of him being a different variant. So, he still may potentially go a different way, of course, but at least he still has a basis of, and it was a clever and sneaky way of doing it. He still has the basis of that character, the knowledge of the main timeline Loki, even though he may not necessarily, end up as the mainline timeline Loki in terms of how his life plays out. Because now that he's caught up, it doesn't matter where we throw him in. He's already caught up to everything that's happened thus far. So if a character brings something up, he'll know, he'll be able to reference it and be able to address it, and they can continue on with the story without that having to be a kind of like a not a loophole, but what's the term? When you have it in plot, have it as a plot hole of him like not knowing certain things, or did he really know that, or did he not know that? He doesn't know that because he caught up already with everything that happened. So, but with that said, guy, what are your thoughts on, Loki's thought process or where he is currently, in this first episode?
I like them using that device because we've come to love Loki as the character he's become. And this was a way to, like you said, like hitting fast forward on an old VCR to speed the tape up just to get him caught back up. And I think it's going to be fun because there will be a little different, different takes on things that won't be the same with the Loki we've come to know again. So that's going to be interesting to see what those little variations are, because he still has a bit of that arrogant, smugness about him as well.
For sure.
So yeah.
Chris?
I absolutely agree with both of you. And this is the fast forward approach that, okay, we're still going to get the Loki that we've seen up until this moment, but we're just going to use and love the 35 millimeter film motif to very Stanley Kubrick, I might add. We're going to all of a sudden just fast forward through everything that he sees, he understands, to get to the point where it's going to be more or less the Loki that we've seen through the films. So yeah, it's just like speeding through. But I want to point out that, it's still Loki, and there's multiple references to his ability to escape, the great escape artist. So we still don't know what Agent Mobius is offering him. So I think that if you have knowledge of your future, wouldn't you try to avoid that future? And just like they've already said there's going to be a Loki season 2, and we've had sequels, just because we get to the end of a film doesn't mean that there can't be another film. So I think what we're going to see throughout this is Loki is going to try to figure out how to escape his destiny that he's seen. I mean, and, we see a person getting choked by Thanos. Maybe that person looks like Loki, but maybe it doesn't turn out to be Loki. But that's just a fascinating part that we're going to get to see what happens as the series goes on, and we'll get to see his personal journey of, armed with the knowledge that he has and his reputation as the ultimate escapist, how does he engineer the ultimate escape of his fate and create a second reel?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess in thinking of that too, and I don't know what your thoughts, each of you, your thoughts on this is, going back to that tactic that he utilizes of like wooing or bringing, kind of, attracting people in and then eventually betraying them. I found it interesting, in that same regard of him actually, coming to that realization of, okay, I give up, like, I'll help you guys. That even though he opens up and he reveals, like, he puts all his cards on the table, so to speak, of why he does the things that he does, if it's still a play. Like,
of course,
like,
it is.
Even though
Yes.
he's giving that indication of, okay, I give in, like, I'm willing to help you guys. You got me. Exactly. That it may still be a play, to your point, Chris, of, okay, let me just take this ride, for a while and figure out how things work a little bit. And then, while I'm trying to figure out how this TVA works and all the, facets of it, then I could kind of figure out what my play is going to be of how to shape things in the manner and the way that I want it to go.
Mm-hmm. Play along while figuring out how to use it to your own advantage.
Exactly. So that part of it will be interesting going forward, even though to a degree, on some level, I feel that he was opening up and revealing, that element of himself. Yeah. At the same time, I still feel that he's still, trying to play his hand.
Of course, every good liar has a little bit of truth in it.
That's right.
So that part of it I found, really fascinating, and it's going to, as I said, be fascinating going forward. Now, in thinking of Agent Mobius, and talking about that character. His character I found interesting also in that, unlike many of the other characters who seem like very, authoritarian and very uniform and very by the books, he is very, unconventional and thinks outside the box, which is kind of at a contrast to, it seems, the way the TVA, functions as an organization. So that part of his character I found interesting, and also the fact that many times Loki is the smartest person in the room, and he's the person who can kind of manipulate everybody and kind of, twist people in whatever direction he wants them to go. And for once, he's actually put up against somebody who is able to dance with him and can outthink him. So, what are your thoughts on that and in that character? Because one thing that I found interesting is that, and I don't know if you guys caught this, when they were sitting down together and he was talking about, okay, I'm an agent, I go against, I do cases on dangerous variants. And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm a dangerous variant, in typical Loki fashion. He's like, yeah, okay, I'm a dangerous variant. That's why you're after me. He's like, no, like you're a pussycat. Like it's actually some, actual threatening, variants. Even though for us, we know that is the reason why he's there. But he finds a way, to try to put Loki in his place versus like having him think that he's more important than what he is. So, but yeah, what were your thoughts on that character and perhaps like how he may continue to develop for either of you?
So I love the character. I love the low-keyness and the dialogue, the way he delivers it is brilliant. I especially love the reference when they're walking through the hallway that if you're gonna destroy everything, you can start with my desk, or the reference to the night view department. Like that's the department I'll help you with. So I loved everything about it, and he seems all knowledgeable about stuff in the TVA. Clearly, he's been there a while. How long he doesn't know, because as he says, time passes differently in the TVA, and that's why I initially believed that he's the equivalent of, for all your Star Trek fans out there, to Star Trek Voyager's Captain Braxton, in which we'll talk about this more later, but I think he's a prime candidate to be the variant that's doing away with the Minutemen, because he has the inside knowledge of how the Minutemen work. And in Star Trek Voyager, the character Captain Braxton is someone from the future who's sent back to help with a couple of events. And through tragic turns, it turns out that he is the person who's instigating, a future version of himself is the person who's instigating all these events in the past that he himself was sent to solve. So I think because he's so knowledgeable, and he has a special interest in Loki, he has all the things set up to be my first candidate to be the actual variant who's trying to eliminate the Minutemen and perhaps even the TVA itself. So I think that he sort of has an Anakin path ahead of him, that I think he's the guy who knows how everything works, but he thinks outside the box in terms of what the TVA should do as opposed to what the posters, and I love the posters, or the rules should say we should do. But I think that there's some darkness in there that I think we might see later on.
Okay, question for you, Chris.
Yeah.
So you see him as possibly being the cause of this. Do you think it's inadvertent, or does he go rogue? Do you think the thinking outside the box that you see him doing is what inadvertently causes it, or is it something he does on purpose?
I think it's going to be something he does on purpose. But because he has the will to stray from the rules and do it, he's going to just take it one step too far.
Interesting theory.
Interesting. And guess what, guys? Great segue. So going into theories and what ifs, and it's funny you bring that up, Chris, is in talking about theories and things that may happen. I agree with you to a degree in terms of him playing a larger hand in what will happen in the show. However, I feel that he may actually end up being siding with Loki and helping him, functioning in that gray area of dismantling the TVA somehow. Because one thing that I found interesting in terms of like a quote, and it was an exchange between him and Loki, was when they were walking the halls and they were heading back to his holding area or his interrogation room, whatever you want to call it. There was that quote of Loki saying, the idea that your little club decides the fate of millions across the existence at the behest of 3 space lizards, like just the idea that you have this organization that functions in the very black and white of, okay, we can't allow, this Nexus event to happen. We have to get rid of it immediately. Like we know better than you guys, and we understand that the timeline needs to be this way because we know what's best for you. Like that idea, especially in what we have seen in the past, where we've had a lot of people or groups that have functioned in that kind of area of thinking that they know what's best, is something that we've seen before, where they kind of there's a potential there to get into an area of hypocrisy where they may end up going, the organization in and of itself may end up going off the rails and may end up contradicting their very ideals that they are about. And in doing so, because Mobius knows how they work, it's Loki will need him in order to be able to dismantle the TVA, eventually. Kind of similar to like what happened to S.H.I.E.L.D., where we had with Captain America and with, Nick Fury, where, dismantling that group from the inside out, basically, because something happens that demonstrates that they are not necessarily the overall authority, or they shouldn't be trusted as the overall authority, in that regard. And then in that same regard of Hunter, I guess B-15, being that one person where even though they'll be faced with the reality of the hypocrisy of the TVA, they're still going to follow orders, exactly, because she is still very much by the books. It's kind of in a similar way in thinking of another franchise of Doctor Strange, where you have that whole dynamic of the Ancient One and Mordo and Doctor Strange, where Strange is very unconventional in how he goes about things, and there was a conflict there because Mordo was kind of in a weird place because he realized the hypocrisy of the Ancient One and how he responded to that. So but yeah, so, Matt, go ahead.
So of the 2 theories, I like Chris's theory, but I've been leaning towards Brandon's that they're going to end up going against the TVA with Owen Wilson and Loki. And I think that's going to be interesting to watch. But that's my theory as well, that they, go from protecting the sacred timeline to becoming kind of an authoritarian type power that needs to be stopped, and he'll be useful in stopping it. So yeah, that's kind of, and it's going to be kind of like a buddy comedy with the 2 of them. So yeah,
for sure. But Chris, did you have any added thoughts with the theory that you had?
Yes. So while I want to give out a shout out to the Wilson brothers, because we have Owen in the MCU and we have Luke in the DCU with Stargirl, which is going to premiere in August for season 2.
Sure.
So much love to both brothers. So I think that while he is my prime candidate, I don't think he's necessarily my only candidate. I still like the idea that it's some type of disgruntled employee who's going to want to take down
Casey. It's got to be Casey.
Could be Casey. And, I think that the reason why they're collecting all the reset charges is because whoever it is wanting to create a massive reset charge that will just wipe out the TVA. And that's why they're collecting all of them. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree with the idea that, power corrupts and ultimate power ultimately corrupts. So it could be that we see a scenario that someone recognizes that the TVA has grown so large and so powerful that it has strayed from its mission. And I think primarily it'll be because they can't adapt. And here's my example of why I think they can't adapt. There's the reference to the church in France that this is the 6th attack in 7 days, or the 7th attack in 6 days, one of the two. And yet at the end, you see that they're still sending only 4-person crews of Minutemen to investigate these incidents. Like, how many incidences where you get attacked and killed does it take for you to adapt and say, okay, we're sending 8 guys now, or we're going to send them with better weapons, but something, so they just don't keep on doing the same. And why they just keep on doing the same and getting wiped out is because that's what the books say. The books probably say it's a 4-person crew and they just can't adapt. They're inflexible. And so that inflexibility might be what ultimately leads them to be corrupted from the original mission, and hence might lead to the Mobius Loki team up to try to change things, or ultimately perhaps, as you mentioned with Shield, to tear the thing down to build up a new one, because you can't build a new building on top of the old building. One of them has to be raised to build something new.
And then here's a added theory to go into how it connects with everything else is perhaps because of the fact that they have to knock it down to build it back up is why that chaos that is set to happen in Doctor Strange happens, because like they're fighting amongst themselves and rebuilding. There isn't anyone to oversee the issues that are happening elsewhere. So there isn't anyone out there to police it that normally would be there to police it. So that Nexus event is allowed to go off the rails because the TVA is still in the process of rebuilding itself.
So here's a question. I don't know if this is the right time for it, but this is just something I came away with from the first episode. TVA can see the sacred timeline, right?
Yeah.
So they can see the future and the past. They see everything on that timeline. They can see everything, right?
So
can they see themselves, or are they outside of the timeline? Can they see how what they're doing will end?
They must.
That is a great question. Yeah, I'm assuming so, because the way that I gathered from the way that they explained it is that they are functioning as a part of that sacred timeline, and with all the other timelines that I guess the timekeepers have designated as the timeline to exist, however many parallel versions you have of it. I guess the probably the easiest way to think of it is I'm thinking of it as like a bundle of straw, and like each of the straws are acting as these parallel universes, and so they've already have it in that bundle of what they expect that sacred timeline to be across all the multiverse. And I'm assuming that they function, within that based on the rules that they have stipulated.
But with the variants, can they see how the variants are going to end? Because that's still a part of time, even though it's a variant from the sacred timeline. Or am I just digging too deep into this?
No, like I don't think you are. And let me go here. So I've been thinking about this, and when they're in the church in France, they say, okay, like it's approaching, this branching is approaching a red line. So we'll never explain what happens if it passes the red line. Does passing the red line mean that the timekeepers can no longer see what happens?
See, the way that I read it is that the red line is like where they and let me know if you guys pictured it a different way, that the red line was basically the point where they weren't able to reset at all. So like they couldn't use it a device at that
That's
point.
What I thought
it went
as well.
So far off the rails that they can't take it back.
Well, that led me to wonder if it goes so far off the rails that they can't reset it, does that create another universe timeline in the multiverse?
And let me take that thought and run with it one step even further. And like, if a new timeline then is created, do the timekeepers just hide that fact and make everyone believe there's only one sacred timeline, and hiding the
When
fact
they're
that
in
there
it.
actually are other timelines that are created when they can't fix the deviation or the variant of the first
Hypocrisy. Yep.
democracy.
Yep.
Yes.
So this kind of
Interesting.
keeps going with this though. So the TVA itself is outside of the sacred timeline, right?
Yeah.
So can they not see what's going to happen in the TVA universe, if you want to call that a pocket universe or whatever? Can they not see what's going to happen outside of the sacred timeline, or do they see all omniscient like gods?
I see what you're saying. So that's an interesting question. Like, from what they explained, I would picture that even though it is a pocket universe, that they're still privy to what's happening with the TVA.
So they knew Loki was going to escape into the hallway and come back, and generally agree to do what Owen Wilson wanted him to do.
I see what you're saying. With that, I don't know. It may be I'm picturing that they have ideas. So we have the Nexus event. Excuse me, the Nexus event that he ventures off and he becomes a variant. And your question is it a situation where they were aware that he would go off and create this Nexus event? Is that your question?
Kind of. And also, how powerful are the Time Lords? Like, are they gods? Are they omniscient? Do they see all? You know, that type of thing. I'm just questions that it left me with.
I think inside the pocket universe is a blind spot.
That's kind of what I was leaning towards, because, you know, they couldn't tell that Loki was going to escape the room, or Owen Wilson or Mobius would have known that he was going to, you know, pickpocket him if he saw it on his timeline thing, right?
For sure.
And also there's the idea that it's the Time Lords provide the information to the bureaucracy,
and they just go with it.
Yeah, maybe they withhold some parts of the information.
Yeah.
Which again goes back to my whole idea that they keep on reinforcing the image that there's the sacred timeline, but I think there's other timelines. And, you know, the hypocrisy is that when it spins out of control, they just don't tell people. And like, no, we fixed it. Right.
Just don't look over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here we go. We're thinking. I'm gonna throw a curveball your way and thinking about like thematically of the Wizard of Oz, like looking behind a curtain. Like maybe they shape themselves to be more powerful than what they are, and they really are in over their heads in terms of controlling.
But they have to keep up the facade.
Yeah, they have to keep up the facade for sure.
Interesting.
So that could, that would be an interesting, idea to see that happen. And if it does happen, you heard it here first, guys, from our show, episode 1.
I feel like this is also kind of a conversation you have at a house party at 3 a.m. when everyone's a little drunk. But what about the Time Lord, man? You
know. But with that being said, guys, just final thoughts on this first episode and kind of just jumping off of what we said for What Ifs, perhaps some hopes of, you guys for the most part touched on it, but just final thoughts overall on episode 1.
I loved it. I thought it was a great way to bring it in. I love the introduction of all the characters. I like seeing, I'm not going to be able to pronounce her name, but Hunter B-15. She was also in Lovecraft Country. I love seeing her back. She's great. And everyone. And anytime I see Owen Wilson, I'm just waiting. He has to whip out, oh, wow, at some point in this series.
And I've heard that too. And I'm hoping that maybe he's just not doing it so that way he could kind of like separate himself.
He's going to sneak it in somewhere.
From that ism. Maybe they'll save it for the end. Maybe
I hope
for
so.
The season finale.
Wow, something. But I'm here for it. I love it. I was enjoying this one the most of all of them, and so far I'm not wrong. Awesome.
Chris?
I desperately want one of those posters on the walls. I don't care which one it is. I desperately want one of those. It just represents the vibe of the show so well. And the other thing I also really liked was that there's not a single gun in the episode, and I think whether it was on purpose or not, I think it sends the right message right now with all like the violence that we've seen lately, that Sure, they have these batons that can like prune you instantly, but I kind of like that there was like a no gun policy in this first episode. And in terms of what I look forward to seeing, I I'm sort of hoping for a Black Widow cameo, because in the previews that we see for the series, there's a moment that it really looks like he might be in the dimension for the last Infinity Stone, where you have to sacrifice someone in order to achieve it. And there's a silhouette of a woman, and
Yep.
the color pasties and everything makes me think, my God, I sort of hope it's the Widow. So I am hoping for a Black Widow cameo.
For sure, for sure. I guess it just overall, like, now that we're getting into a lot of this multiversal stuff, because it seems like that has been a theme outside of maybe Falcon and Winter Soldier, which has kind of been like its own pocket thing in terms of a plot path that it seems to be going. All the other ones seem to be going with that theme, and even with some of the films that we have coming out, it seems to be going with that theme. Case in point with Spider-Man and with a few other films that are going to be following along with that. So I'm just looking forward to what they do with the different variants of Loki and which ones they decide to go with. I know we've gotten teases of it in the promotional material in trailers, but I think that they're still holding, some of their cards close to the vest on some of the other ones that we may see. I'm hoping that perhaps we see the female Loki as well. I have an idea that might be coming, but we'll see. But I have a feeling that female Loki might be a possibility. But even outside of that, like with the episodes that we have, like one thing that I would say with WandaVision, I felt that, overall it was a terrific series, but there were moments where, at least towards the end, and it's based on the circumstances of course, with the pandemic, that it fell a little flat because they had to change some things.
Blasphemy. Where's the mute button?
No, well, like I said, overall, I enjoyed it quite a bit. But if I was to be nitpicky, and then the same thing with Falcon and Winter Soldier, I liked it as well. However, I felt that it could have been stretched a little more, which is weird for me to say, because a lot of times I'll say that needs to have 2 or 3 episodes cut off from its overall season. But I feel like it could have, stood to have two additional episodes to kind of stretch the narrative a little further. Because
a little Bucky and Sam's sister, yeah.
Well, I was saying more so even with like the dynamic or the arc of U.S. Agent, like that seemed very fast, yes. and I felt like they could have let that breathe a little bit more. But overall, like I said, it was still fun. So in that same regard, now that they have those 2 series already done and wrapped, hoping that with this series that it feels like, because I understand it's going to be 6 episodes, when in that 6 episode arc, that it allows enough space to, tell the story that they want to tell, because there's so much in here. When you're dealing with time travel, I feel it's such like a sticky proposition, because there's so many elements that you're dealing with of like, alternate universes or different time periods and things. And sometimes that can kind of get lost in a shuffle if you're not providing that type of story enough space. So hopefully within the 6 episode arc, it feels like a story that's well paced and continues to move forward and nicely sets up a second season. So with that being said, guys, I want to thank my hosts guest hosts down below, Matt as well as Chris. Before I let you guys go, can you tell folks where they can find you, whoever would like to go first?
Chris, Matt, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I'm on Twitter, Big Matty Nasty, without the A at the nasty part. Don't ask what that means. I got that like 10 years ago, and I just never bothered changing it. And boy. So that's where you can find me. If you want to argue with me, please do.
Cool. Chris?
You can find me on Instagram at Verdi Cosplay, where you'll see daily a different cosplay. And I am wrapping up to go to Otakon in August and AwesomeCon, where I will have much more samples of like really incredible cosplay done by dedicated people. come see how the impossible is made possible.
Awesome stuff. And last but not least, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. You can find me at Brandon Choi ENT, which you see right here on Twitter, and Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. Also, you can find us on Twitter at Move and Shake, UNLTD, of course, and of course, Movers Shakers Unlimited on Instagram. As always, make sure if you wanted to join this conversation, whether you're watching it live or watching it after the fact, that you are joining that conversation with Glorious Green MNSU or Emerald Variant MNSU. Either of those will suffice. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe out there, and I'll see you soon.